Vordersakerasters, the dust and the iron. The basement door crashed open against the concrete floor. Behind her, footsteps, heavy, fast, closing. Emma Sterling did not look back. 13 hours earlier, the Blackwood Library had been quiet in the way old places are quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the accumulation of it. Dust and rain and wood settling into a kind of stillness. Emma knelt on a blue foam pad, her right hand gripping a rusted crowbar, the metal cold and heavy in her palm. She wore work gloves. She wore a dust mask. She had come to the library on this rainy Tuesday to help with the renovation, though the basement had not been scheduled for this stage. Her supervisor, Thomas, had mentioned a structural issue. Something about water damage in the subfloor. She had volunteered immediately, the crowbar's tip wedged into the gap between two damp oak floorboards, and Emma set her weight against it. Her brows furrowed. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold basement air. The wood groaned, a long, prolonged sound, like something trapped and struggling. Rain drummed against the single high window, and in the beam of her maglight, dust motes rose in thick clouds, suspended and drifting like particles in amber. The board snapped upward with a crack that echoed through the basement. Her hand reached into the dark cavity before she'd fully processed the sound. Cold metal, textured, real. Rust flaking against her gloved fingers as she pulled. An oilcloth bundle emerged from the gap, roughly 12 by 8 inches, wrapped in layers so tattered they crumbled at her touch. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The smell was museum air, stale, preserved, forgotten. Emma peeled back the cloth with trembling fingers. Each layer revealed less decay, and then, beneath the final fold, a galvanized steel box. Small, perfectly sealed. A lead seal stamped with a stylized B held the lid shut, and the lead itself was oxidized to a dull gray. She used the edge of her pocket knife to pry the seal free. It fell to the floor with a dull tink. The lid lifted. Inside, 3 black cassette tapes arranged with military precision, and beneath them, a leather journal bound in cracked black leather, its pages yellowed and curled at the edges. Emma picked up the journal. Her hands had stopped shaking. The first page had a name written in thick black ink, the letters deliberately formed. Dr. Arthur Sterling, Blackwood Residency, 1994. The name was underlined twice. Emma's father had died in 1998. Car accident. She had been 7 years old. She turned the page. The basement door at the top of the stairs exploded inward. A silhouette in a dark windbreaker charged down the concrete steps, the sound of boots thundering like a hammer against metal. Emma scrambled to her feet, clutching the steel box to her chest. The footsteps accelerated. The smell of rain and outside air rushed down with the intruder, whoever they were. A black neck gaiter covered the lower half of the attacker's face. The gloved hand came at her fast, fingers spread wide and closed around her shoulder. The grip was professional, hard, practiced. Emma was jerked backward, her boots skidding across the dusty floor. And she did the only thing her panicked body knew to do. She swung the steel box upward and outward, with every ounce of leverage she could generate. The corner of the box caught the attacker's forearm with a sickening thud that sent a vibration up through her arms. The attacker grunted, a sound of pain and surprise, and his grip loosened just enough for Emma to drive her knee upward into the soft space below his ribs. "Give it here." His voice was gravelly, muffled by the gaiter. Emma shoved him backward. His jacket crumpled against a shelf of old library catalogs, and the entire metal structure groaned and tilted. Catalog cards spilled like snow, thousands of them, white and rectangular, cascading down around them. Emma didn't wait to see him fall. She ran. The emergency exit sign glowed red in the darkness ahead, that pristine, impossible red that only official safety signs achieved. Her hand slammed against the bar. The door swung open into the sound of heavy rain, and then she was in the alley, her boots splashing through a puddle so deep it came over her ankle. The water was cold, shocking. She looked back. The basement door was closing, the pneumatic closer hissing, mechanical, slow. And through the narrowing gap, she saw him still standing where she'd left him, not following, his hand reaching for a radio on his belt. His face was still hidden. Emma ran. The kitchen was warm. Emma sat at her wooden table, a white towel wrapped around her wet hair, and stared at the Sony tape recorder. It was an old model, TCM 200DV, professional grade, the kind her father used to keep in his office. How it had survived, how it was sitting on her kitchen table now, she couldn't quite process. A steaming mug of tea sat in the background. The kitchen clock ticked. 1-2, 1-2. Metronome of normalcy in a room that had begun to feel like the interior of someone else's life. Her finger hovered over the play button. The button clicked down. The cassette spools began their slow rotation. The speaker emitted a thin hiss of static that filled the room like something alive, something pressing against the walls and the ceiling, and then the voice, deep, resonant, cold as academic observation, cut through it. The Blackwood experiment is now live. High-frequency emotional triggers will be broadcast through the local radio tower starting at Oro 600. Emma's hand didn't move. She opened the journal to the middle of the book instead. The pages fell open to a fold as if it had been opened there 100 times. The Polaroid fell free and landed face up on the table. The photograph showed 3 men in champagne toasts. Mayor Henderson, Police Chief Morrison, and between them, a man she recognized from the one photograph her mother kept on the hallway shelf in a silver frame. Her father. The Architects of Harmony, 1995, was written on the back in neat handwriting. Not her father's. A woman's careful script. Dad? Emma's voice was a whisper, even though she was alone. Even though he had been dead for 16 years. She turned the page. A list, handwritten, organized by headers and dates. Under a section marked Subjects Generation 2 Alpha, she found her own name written in the same neat handwriting, a woman's careful script. Emma Sterling, R4-12-1991. Emma slammed the journal shut. The tape recorder shrieked, a high-pitched, electronic wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She covered her ears and closed her eyes. Water spilled across the table, and the glass toppled and shattered on the kitchen floor. When the sound stopped, there was only rain against the window and the sound of her own breathing, fast and shallow and terrified. The white Subaru moved fast down the narrow, tree-lined road. Emma's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The steel box was buckled into the passenger seat with care, as if it were a passenger who needed restraint. The dashboard lights glowed green. Engine RPM steady, tires humming on wet asphalt. Behind her, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Then, closer, too close. A black Dodge Ram truck, massive and matte, accelerated until its bumper kissed hers. Emma's foot pressed the accelerator. The Subaru surged forward, but the truck surged faster. And then the impact came. Metal on metal, a grinding sound that seemed to come from inside her own chest. The truck was pushing her off the road. Emma swerved left. The truck followed, and its weight hit her side like a living thing. The Subaru lurched toward the steep embankment at the edge of the road, and Emma screamed, a pure animal sound, while her hands fought the wheel to keep it straight. The passenger window cracked in a spiderweb pattern. the glass holding together but fragmenting, creating 1,000 tiny fractures. The tree came without warning. Her passenger door clipped the trunk with a sound like a gunshot. The Subaru spun, a complete 180-degree rotation, and then gravity won. The car slid into a ditch, and Emma's head snapped against the headrest. The impact filled her vision with white light. When the light faded, the engine was dead. Steam hissed from the radiator. The truck was gone, vanished into the mist of rain and darkness. Only the sound of her own breathing filled the silence, and beneath it, the metallic tick of cooling metal. Emma fumbled for the steel box. It had fallen to the floorboard, but it was intact. She kicked the driver's door open. It was wedged tight against the ditch wall, but opened just enough for her to squeeze through. Her body scraped against the frame. Blood trickled down her forehead from where the headrest had caught her. Not today. The words came out as barely a whisper, defiant against nothing, against no one, against the rain. She crawled up the embankment, clutching the box to her chest. The road was empty in both directions. The truck was gone. The side window of the town clerk's office shattered when she threw the rock. Glass rained down onto the floor and the sill. Emma reached through the opening, unlocked the latch with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking, and tumbled through. The glass cut her palm, a bright line of pain that bloomed into warmth. But she barely registered it. The office was dark. Moonlight came through the broken window and cast sharp shadows across filing cabinets and a large oak desk. Emma moved through the darkness like something hunted, because that's what she was. Hunted. The basement archive was down a narrow staircase. The air down there was different. Older, more settled, thick with the dust of forgotten documentation. Emma's flashlight beam swept across rows of filing boxes, each labeled with dates. She found what she was looking for in a folder marked Project Redline. A manila folder fat with papers and checks. Bank checks, large amounts. 50,000, 100,000, all signed by David Sterling. All in payment to an account labeled only Research Operations. The handwriting on the pay to the order of line was her father's. She recognized it from his notes to the household staff, from letters she'd found years ago and thrown away. In the same drawer, buried beneath other files, was a book. Town Records, 1994. It was hollowed out. Inside, nestled in the cavity like a secret, even in a secret, was a small electronic device. Circuit board, wires, a frequency modulator. A sticker on the back read, Property of David Sterling. A red LED blinked slowly, once per second, steady, alive. Emma heard the footstep on the floorboard above her head at the exact moment she pulled the device free. Then another footstep, and another. She dropped the ledger. It hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. A shadow passed the frosted glass door of the office upstairs. Emma moved to the back of the archive, behind a heavy oak desk that smelled of old leather and linseed oil. She held her breath. Her fingers pressed against her own ribs as if she could push her heartbeat down into silence. The doorknob began to turn slowly. The door opened. A flashlight beam swept the room in a methodical pattern, wall to wall, floor to ceiling. And then a man entered. Trench coat, polished shoes. The silenced pistol hung at his side, held with the ease of familiarity. Emma. His voice was the same voice from the tape. Clinical. Cold. It was her father's voice. Come out. Don't make this harder than it has to be. But it wasn't her father. She had watched them lower his casket into the ground when she was 7 years old. She had thrown a handful of dirt down into that hole. She had cried. The man standing in the office, the one holding the pistol, wore her father's face. Emma stood up from behind the desk. His flashlight found her immediately, and the light was almost blinding after the darkness. She held the steel box out in front of her like a shield or an offering. Her face was wet, not from rain, but from tears she didn't remember shedding. The rain drummed on the roof above them, a steady percussion. "You killed them, didn't you?" Her voice was trembling. "The people who wanted to stop you." The man who wore her father's face took a step forward. His shoes crunched on the glass from the broken window. The gun remained pointed at her sternum, unwavering. "We were curating a society, Emma," he said. His tone was academic, as if explaining a theory to a bored classroom. "Removing the volatility of human emotion. You were the first success." Emma's eyes moved to the door beside the desk, the internal door that led to the main town clerk's office. The distance was perhaps 15 feet. The man was between her and it, but he was still standing near the entrance to the archive, and his attention was split between the gun in his hand and the words he was speaking. She picked up the town records book from the floor with one fluid motion and hurled it at his head. He reacted with the precision of a trained operative. His head tilted, the book whistled past, missing by inches. But the moment of distraction was all she needed. Emma dove toward the broken window, the one she'd entered through, and launched herself out of it with a reckless abandon that surprised even her. The glass cut her shoulder as she went through. She hit the ground on the other side, hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs, and then she was running. Behind her, she heard him move to the window. A pause, a decision being made. The silenced gunshot was barely more than a whisper. Thwip, followed by the sound of the bullet splintering the window frame above her head just as she disappeared into the darkness. Emma burst through the double doors of the town hall like a storm. The doors crashed against the walls on either side, and the sound reverberated through the meeting room. 200 heads turned in unison. They were sitting in chairs arranged in neat rows, all facing the podium where Mayor Henderson stood, all turning at the exact same moment as if operated by a single motor. She was covered in mud and blood. The steel box was still clutched to her chest, and her eyes were wild with panic and desperation and the pure animal need to be heard. "Listen to me," she screamed the words. "Listen to me. They've been using us, all of us." Mayor Henderson's face was serene. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look alarmed. He looked exactly like a man who had expected this moment and had prepared for it with meticulous care. He raised his left hand slightly, a gesture so subtle that only someone very close to him would have noticed it. The two police officers at the sides of the room began to move toward Emma. "Emma, please." His voice came through the microphone system, calm and gentle, the voice of a man speaking to someone having a breakdown. "You're having another episode. Just put the box down and we can get you help." Emma lunged toward the sound system on the far wall. The auxiliary input jack was there, right where she'd remembered seeing it during an earlier town meeting. She fumbled with the tape recorder, trying to fit the connector into the port. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the device. An officer tackled her from the side. She hit the play button just as he drove her to the ground. Their combined momentum carried them forward, and Emma's shoulders slammed against the wall, driving the auxiliary connector home. The tape engaged, the spools began to turn, and her father's voice exploded through the town hall speakers at full volume. Subject Emma Sterling has reached final integration. If she resists, the failsafe must be triggered. The voice was distorted and amplified 100 times over. It filled the room, pressed against the walls, made the floorboards vibrate. Emma was pinned against the floor tile by the officer's weight. But for a moment, just a moment, the town had heard the truth. The mayor's hand moved beneath the podium. He pressed a large red button on a control box, a deliberate, committed motion. The sound that followed was not loud, but it was pervasive. A low, vibrating hum that seemed to emanate from the floorboards themselves, from the very foundation of the building, from the bones of the town. 200 people's eyes glazed over simultaneously. The transformation was immediate and absolute. All expression drained from their faces. They stood up from their chairs, all of them, all at the same moment, in a synchronized motion so perfect it seemed almost impossible. 200 chairs scraped backward on the wooden floor at the exact same instant, creating a sound like the cry of some massive, dying creature. They began to move toward Emma. Hands grabbed at her, hair, coat, arms, legs. Mrs. Gable was there. Emma had known her since childhood, had had lemonade on her porch in the summer. Mrs. Gable's eyes were blank and black and empty. Emma fought her, elbowing her away, and Mrs. Gable fell backward without any sign of pain or awareness. "Mrs. Gable, stop, it's me." But Mrs. Gable couldn't stop. None of them could stop. They were programmed, modulated, operating under a frequency that had rewritten whatever neural pathways made them human. Emma bit the hand of an officer. Actually bit down, her teeth breaking skin, tasting blood. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. She broke free for a second, just a second, and grabbed the steel box again. She swung it in a wide arc, clearing a path through the mindless crowd toward the stage. A man went down, then a woman. The box connected with a sharp, brutal sound, and blood flew. She ran for the stage. Emma scrambled up the wooden steps onto the stage, her gasping breath the only sound beneath the steady, pervasive hum. She found herself face to face with two figures standing in the shadows at the back of the stage. One was the mayor. The other was her father. But this was not the man who had worn her father's face in the town clerk's office. This was a different man entirely. Older, perhaps, or simply more present. He looked directly at her with eyes that contained no malice, no emotion of any kind. He simply looked, as if she were an interesting specimen that had performed exactly as predicted. "Emma." He reached into his pocket. "You've been very good." He pulled out a small silver transmitter. It was sleek and modern. Nothing like the equipment from 1994, nothing like the technology that should have existed in Blackwood. The device had a single dial and a red light on its face. The light was blinking steadily. "The box wasn't meant to be hidden forever," he said. His voice was kind, almost loving. "It was the trigger for your final stage. You performed perfectly." Emma looked down at her own hands. A network of faint blue lines began to pulse beneath her skin. They ran along the paths of her veins, following her arteries, glowing with a light that seemed to come from inside her own body. The light pulsed in time with the hum that filled the room. 1-2, 1-2. A rhythm that wasn't her own heartbeat, wasn't her own breathing, wasn't anything that belonged to her. "What did you do to me?" Her voice sounded very far away. The man turned the dial on the transmitter. Everything changed. The blue veins burned. Emma's eyes rolled backward in her head. Her body convulsed, muscles contracting against bone, tendons pulling tight, joints hyperextending in directions they were not meant to go. She fell to the floor, her body moving in a pattern that wasn't epilepsy and couldn't be stopped. Her last coherent thought was that she could no longer tell where the pain ended and the world began. Then there was only the red light of the dial. Then nothing at all. Emma opened her eyes. She was strapped to a metal chair in a room that had no color and no sound. The air was a perfect, absolute silence. the kind that only existed in places designed for containment. Leather restraints held her wrists and ankles. Her head was fitted with a device, sensors and wires connected to a machine that hummed at a frequency just at the edge of perception. On a table in front of her sat the frequency modulator. It was running. The red LED blinked once per second, and with each blink, Emma felt a pressure in her skull. Not pain exactly, but a sensation of wrongness, of neural pathways being rewritten in real time. She could feel her thoughts being edited. She could feel her memories being accessed like files in a cabinet. The modulator's circuit board contained a pattern. She could see it now, could understand it in a way that made no logical sense. The pattern was a language, a way of encoding information directly into the electrical storm of the human brain. She thought about the library basement. She thought about the dust and the rain and the moment when her hand first touched cold metal. She held that memory, that moment, as if she could crush it into a diamond by sheer force of concentration. The memory was her own, not edited, not rewritten. Hers. Emma focused on the frequency modulator. She began to understand its structure. Not the electronic structure, but the underlying principle. It was broadcasting on a frequency of approximately 40 hertz, gamma waves, the frequency of human consciousness when the mind is active and engaged. She understood that she could disrupt it. She understood that if she could access the frequency modulator herself, if she could change its broadcast from 40 hertz to something else, something that matched the resonant frequency of the electronic components rather than the human brain, the feedback would destroy the entire system. The problem was the restraints. Emma waited. An hour passed, or a day. Time had become meaningless in this room. The restraints were leather and buckle, not electronic. There were no sensors. They had relied on the chair itself, on the device that held her, on the sensors in the device, to keep her sedated and compliant. What they hadn't anticipated was that the same neural rewiring that was meant to control her could be used to understand the very mechanisms of control itself. Emma stopped fighting the frequency. She let it flow through her. She let it map her neural pathways. And in that process, she learned to read it like a language. She learned to encode information back into it. She learned to lie to the machine. Her hands stopped struggling. Her breathing became steady and slow. The sensors registered docility, compliance, perfect pacification. And in the background of that compliance, Emma was working. She had 17 hours of enforced immersion in the modulator's broadcast before the door finally opened. A nurse came in to check on her. A woman in white scrubs with eyes that were not quite focused. She was under the frequency. Emma understood immediately. Probably had been for years. The moment the leather restraint on her left wrist began to unbuckle, part of the nurse's routine, part of the protocol, Emma moved. She didn't move like someone who had been strapped to a chair for hours in sensory deprivation. She moved like someone who had never been restrained at all. Her fist connected with the nurse's temple, and the nurse dropped as if someone had cut her strings. Emma pulled the sensors from her head. The feedback was immediate, a washing wave of clarity that felt almost like drowning, like surfacing from deep water and having too much air suddenly available. She gasped. The frequency modulator on the table fell silent as she disconnected the last sensor lead. The Blackwood radio tower rose against the night sky like a monument to some forgotten god. It was all steel and angle and purpose, a massive structure that transmitted on a frequency that kept an entire town pacified and compliant and perfect. Emma stood at its base with a heavy pipe wrench gripped in both hands. She swung it at the primary cooling line. The wrench connected with a sound like impact, and nitrogen hissed out of the ruptured pipe. Frost formed instantly on the metal, a coating of ice that grew like a living thing. The temperature dropped so rapidly that Emma could see her breath in the air. The second swing targeted the secondary valve. By the third swing, the entire cooling system had begun to fail. The tower's internal temperature spiked. The control panel, a massive array of switches and relays and oscillators that had been tuned to broadcast the frequency that controlled Blackwood, began to overheat. Electrical components failed in cascade. Then the control panel exploded. A shower of sparks erupted across the base of the tower, and for a moment the night was lit up in brilliant orange. The fire caught on the insulation, burned hot and bright and fast. Alarms began to sound, distant sirens, the cry of machines recognizing catastrophic failure. Emma looked down at her arms. The glowing blue veins that had pulsed beneath her skin since the stage of the town hall had faded to nothing. They disappeared like someone had turned off a light. She felt her shoulders drop. She felt her breathing become steady. She felt like something that had been disconnected from a machine and returned, finally, to itself. The tower's warning lights went dark. 1 week later, Emma sat in her kitchen. The newspaper on the table read, "Mayor resigns amid scandal," though the article below the headline was vague about the specific nature of the scandal. The investigation was ongoing. The police chief was cooperating with authorities. The medical director of Blackwood Mental Health Services had disappeared. No one, the article stated, had yet located Dr. Sterling's research facility. Emma picked up the last tape from the steel box. The tape was labeled in handwriting that was not her father's. The letters were graceful, careful, deliberate. The handwriting of someone educated, someone cultured, someone who had disappeared from Emma's life when she was 3 years old. The handwriting of her mother. Emma placed the tape in the Sony recorder. She pressed play. Static first, then a voice, soft and warm and utterly familiar even after 16 years of not hearing it. "Emma, if you are hearing this, the tower has fallen." "Good." A pause. The sound of her mother breathing. "The experiment doesn't need the tower anymore. It lives in the water now. Check your blood again, sweetheart. Check the water." The voice stopped. Emma looked at her glass of water. The glass was filled with ordinary water. Clear, colorless, innocent. In the kitchen light, in the early morning sun, it was simply water. But in the very bottom of the glass, just at the edge of her vision, was a flicker. A single pulse of blue light. Pulse. She looked at her hand. The blue veins beneath her skin didn't appear. But there, just for a moment, a single vein pulsed once. Once per second. Once per second. Once per second. The frequency was still broadcasting. It had simply found a new delivery system. Emma lifted the glass of water to her lips. The liquid was cold as it touched her mouth. She drank.